Welcome back, everyone. It is week 2, day 5, the week before exam week. And we have a lot to cover today. And I know it's a short span of time until our exam, but I have done my best here to see if I can help us memorize what it is that we're doing here. Okay, because there's a lot of information now that we're going to have to learn. We're going to take what we've already learned, what we already know, and piece it together in the official MVC framework. So I'm going to explain what that is today. It's the special way that we design our app with the folders and files in the right place and how they communicate to each other, doing what we are doing, which is building CRUD apps, displaying data from the database to the front end, and pushing data to our database from the front end, right? So we have a two-way now communication between our front and back. So we're going to dive into a special way to design an app that's going to take a little bit of explaining to do, okay? So I'll show you what I mean. I know it's vague still, but let's dive into what it is that we're talking about today. Okay, so we're going to review a little bit of the request response cycle. When you go into your app that you are building, your full stack CRUD app, you are entering in your view, your users see the front end, right? The client. Then something happens in the back end. We don't actually see. All this happens and it talks to our database. Now, our database has that data stored, and whenever our client wants information, it does something here, and then it moves it back to the front end. So magically, we get that information from the database to the front end. And we went over that process, those steps, yesterday in a certain way that wasn't fully complete. I wanted to show you the bare bone minimum of how to get a database table onto the HTTP file or onto the HTML file. In order to do this now, we are going to go through a process of what's called modularization. I know it's a big word, but we're going to learn it. A module is a file, okay? Simple enough. A module is a file. So when we talk about modularization, we're talking about giving work to different files for them to do different things. And we put them in their own folders. This is what each of these files that we're going to be going over, that together communicate to each other what they need in order to talk to the database and present the information to the front. So this is now our back end, right? So this is our cook area. These files here, they receive the information, the order from the front, right? One Krabby Patty. And then the cooks, the 3 cooks now in our kitchen, we have 3 cooks. They work together to give that information and get it from the database and present it back to the client. Okay, and I have an analogy for this because I see here, well, at least for me, in order to get these to mean something or help them stick in my memory more than just a day, I needed to tell myself a little story, which I'm going to tell you guys here to hopefully help you guys remember. Okay, so just keep this in mind. This is what we're working. I'm going to dissect this and make this stick so that when we build it every time, we know what the purpose of the controller view and model is. All right, I have a summary of each here, but again, this is just information. I want to give an analogy, but I'm taking this information from our platform. So in case you want to find this information again, you can always go to my lecture recording, or you can find this in the platform, MVC in Flask. So this is what the model, view, and controller do. I'm going to go over them step by step in just a second. All right, and let's see what they look like in practice before I start explaining them. All right, so the controller is here. Here's the controller, and here's the controller file. Here is the model. So we have two: model, view, and controller. Here's 2 out of 3. And then the view. Where is the view? The view is here. All the stuff that we show on our front end. That's the view. So we have 3 major players we're going to learn about today: the model, the view, and controller. We're not going to learn about them in that order. We're going to learn about them in this order: controller, model, view. But this is what we're learning today, okay? This may often be a question an interviewer may throw on the phone, or a recruiter may throw to you just to check that your knowledge is there as to what this means, the MVC framework, or what modularization means. It means separating the work to different files instead of just putting it all on your server.py. Again, when I was a student, when we were back in my day, back when I was a student just a few years ago, we did all the work on one file, server.py. And so the stuff that goes in this file and this file all were in one. And so this file was actually really long. It had a lot of code. It was kind of hard to read, and it was kind of hard to debug. Since then, we've incorporated the MVC into our Python stack. And so let's go ahead and dive in a little further. So we have now our folders and files in different spaces. We know that their work is distributed. We don't just have one cook in the kitchen. We have multiple helpers now, and they each have their role. Okay. This page here, I'm going to go through and build with this step by step. So here's another module here that I'm going to be using. And lastly, before I get into my presentation, I'm going to be going over what the models are. Okay, we already know what a class is. I'm going to break it down best I can to help it stick. All right, so on to a quick presentation before we start building this. Okay, so I'm going to give you a sort of analogy to help remember why we break it up into what's called a controller, a model, and then the view. Okay, 3 parts again: model, view, controller. So I'm going to be testing you guys on this, so please stay attentive and try to stick with my broken analogies here, okay, please? Thank you. Alrighty, so, all right, let's get started. I have a slide I prepared for us all. Let's go ahead and dive into it. MVC design pattern, an analogy for modularization. So we're continuing on with our food analogy from our restaurant app analogy, and it's going to be a little different here. I'm slightly editing the analogy, but we're going to go ahead and see how much it will work for us. Now, again, let's go over the purposes of modularization, and then we're gonna go into what each file does: the model, view, and controller. Okay, so just to reiterate, the reason we do this, the reason we separate the work, is for separation of concerns. It helps separate the application logic to independent modules or files, okay? When components, each with a specific task, they make code easier to understand, test, maintain, in the MVC framework. Okay, so the other day, my parents went to a restaurant, and it was the coldest day here in Texas, okay? It was freezing. There was ice on the road,
Can you get
and
the whole light, please?
it was so cold
Right
that
there.
oh, hold on. Everyone, please mute if you are not speaking or asking a question. Throw me off. So they were at a restaurant. It was so cold that workers didn't come in, and there was only one worker in the restaurant. The person greeting them was the person sitting them at their table and preparing their food. For some reason, Texans can't handle the cold, and there was only one worker that day. And so when they were waiting for their food, it took them a long time. it would have been more helpful if that person had other workers there, one person to work the kitchen, maybe another person to maintain other parts of the kitchen, maybe cleaning and chopping and working the back. So we want to put more than one cook in our kitchen so that things are not so hectic just for one worker and for ourselves as the developers reading that and helping that one worker, that one file, right? So what I'm saying is not all the files are on server.py, but we're modularizing them. We're putting them into the controller view and the MVC framework, model view controller. So this helps us with efficiency and reusability as well. So breaking down the application into smaller parts, we can reuse some of those class models so that we can take advantage of building instances. So we can separate the work. When we separate and modularize our app, we can have different developers work in our app at the same time, working on different files. And that's what this is highlighting, collaborative development here. Okay. Also helps with scalability. So that means however big your app gets, the more you compartmentalize your app to different functions, the easier it is to grow. All right. It also helps with error handling and integration with other systems. So the more you break up your app, the more you make it multiple components working together, not just one giant piece, the better it is. So let's break up our kitchen into pieces. Let's have more than one cook in the back, and let's talk about how we can understand the different cooks' roles compared to what we're saying the MVC purposes are for their different files, okay? And so in order to do this, for myself, I had to think of this in a certain way based on my life personal experience, okay? It helped me memorize this. I've heard many different analogies. None of them stuck for me except for this personal one. So bear with me here. Indulge me while I tell you a little story about one of my first jobs, okay? It was while I was working at a grocery store in college. It was actually this very Safeway. This one here. I did get an accurate picture. This is Midtown in San Jose. And I can tell you stories for days, okay? Lots of stories that crazy stuff happened in that Safeway. But I had a good work experience, okay? And I'm able to tell an analogy from it. So I hope you guys can benefit. So let's go ahead and take a walk down memory lane. Okay, so again, this is actually still the same Safeway. This is the one I worked at. I don't believe that this is the same deli that I worked at, but it looks almost exactly like it. I don't know. Google didn't give me any information there, but this one looks exactly like the one I worked at. And this is the clothes I had to wear. Okay, I had to have this apron on, this color shirt, black pants. I didn't wear the hat, but you get it. Okay, so you would have found me there in 2007, 2008. No, 2012. There we go. My timeline's off. Okay, so let's go into my old deli where I was working. And I'm going to introduce you guys to the deli as if you were going to work there. You're going to need to learn all the roles of the deli there to understand the MVC framework and how they can make sense to us. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into what we call the controller. Okay, so the deli here, as you know, sold fresh meats, slices of cheese, fruit, vegetables, and they would make you sandwiches, right? So in this analogy, we're going to talk about the deli as a sandwich making machine. And when I was being introduced to the deli, there was a sort of system there that was defined and sort of unspoken. But I'm going to lay out 3 different workers in the deli and how they can relate to the MVC so you can remember for yourself. Okay, so the first one here, we're going to call her the controller. Okay, she's the controller. When you go up to the counter and you ask for a sandwich, and by the way, there was this big old sign in front of the counter that said, if your sandwich isn't made in 5 minutes or less, it is free. And so many people took advantage of that because they would just change their order mid-order. Oh, so annoying. But thank goodness I had a good boss. She can see through people's lies, and she would know when I'm being taken advantage of here. So this is our controller. She receives the order. When you step up to the counter, you look at the menu up here, and you say, oh, I want a pastrami sandwich. Okay. She's going to receive that order, and then she's going to start it. She's going to start the sandwich, but she's more like a director. She gets the process started. She doesn't do the whole thing by herself. So she receives incoming requests from the client. So she receives that request, I want a pastrami sandwich. All right. She doesn't have that much logic that she has to do. What she needs to do is make sure that she has the proper ingredients for the sandwich there to get made, and then she will start the process. Okay, now she's receiving the order and assuming the ingredients are right in front of her. And this is going to lead us to our next person in our analogy, and we'll go over them and how they relate to each other again. All right, the next person in our model, in our example, is the model. Okay, is the model. The model works in the back. Okay, and let me give you an example of the model of the person that I worked with when I was at Safeway. This is this guy named Joe. This is not him. He doesn't even really look like him. Joe was much older. I don't know how old Joe was. Joe was old. He was up there, but he was the hardest worker I had ever met. He had an energy that was unmatched. I would try to keep up with Joe just as a personal challenge to myself. Joe could work like 12 hours straight and not get tired, okay? Everyone knew that Joe was a secret hidden gem. And so he's the model worker, all right? So think of him as the model. And he worked in the back. He didn't receive the orders from the sandwiches. What he did was organize the refrigerator. He would cut up the stuff from the refrigerator needed to give to the controller. And so what he would do is work in the back. So when we think of our model, we can think of the file that handles the logic that talks with the database. Okay. Our model is our cook that works in the back of our deli, takes the ingredients from the fridge, cuts them up into pieces, and hands them to the people that are making the sandwich. Okay. Now, every analogy is going to be somewhat broken. So it's going to break at some places, but this is somewhere that you can just memorize basic functions. So the model is the cook in the back that handles working with the database or the refrigerator in our sense, in our analogy. Okay, so we have now two people. We have our controller. She receives the order. She receives the order from the sandwich. She directs traffic. She says to Joe, our model, she says, Joe, I need more lettuce. I need more mushrooms. I need more asparagus. So Joe goes into the back. He goes into the freezer, finds where they are. He pulls them out. He chops them up, and he gives them back to Miss Claudia here, who's our controller, and she will then continue the logic. Okay, once she receives the ingredients, she then passes it on to our third team player, the view. Okay, what does the view do? The view packages up the data nice and neatly and presents it back to the client. So she's the person ringing you up and wrapping up your sandwich, putting a sticker on it, asking if you want a cookie. Okay, she's the view. So she has some logic as well. And this is more like our HTML pages, right? So she's the presentation. She didn't receive the order. She didn't go in the back, but she was the person that you see at the very end of your transaction. She's the view of the whole thing. And so she gives you your final package. She gives you that final sandwich. All right. And so now you are a full-fledged Safeway deli worker. You know now how to work the deli in Midtown Safeway, at least what some of the roles are. And you can think of them as analogies to our MVC framework, our controller who receives the requests. She directs the traffic. She tells the person in the back who is the model. The model is the person that interacts with the database. So he's going into the freezer, the database, and getting that information for the controller. Then the controller, once she finishes her initialization of the sandwich, she starts the process. She hands it over to the view. The view wraps it up and gives it to us nicely in a neat package and says $5. Okay, so here we are. We have our three team players, our model, view, and controller. I want to see how well my analogy sticks so far. And I know we haven't done anything practical yet, but how well do we think we kind of understand the different roles here of a model, view, and controller? I know it might not be the highest number. I appreciate your honesty. I want to increase this number as the lecture goes on. Okay, so far we're just giving a broad overview. Then we're going to get into building our code. We'll do the nitty-gritty stuff, okay? So we have our model, view, and controller. All right, and before we start coding, I have a little poem for you. All right, here we are. Let's embarrass myself here. Model, view, controller. In the realm of code where logic dances, working in a full stack CRUD app, modularization, the key to unlock. Each module, a puzzle. Each a piece, a block. In the world of MVC, where order reigns, model, view, and controller, in harmony they align. Each with its role, each with its place, in the grand tapestry of code they interlace. Like a deli where flavors intertwine, CRUD operations create, read, update, and delete. They define each operation a transaction, a line. In the book of data, they make a sign. It's like Dr. Seuss. Here's to the art of coding, so refined in the realm of software where logic is king. May the modular code, may the MVC decide, and the full stack CRUD app forever shine. Let's go ahead and build now our CRUD app. Okay, so enough of my analogy. You guys get the picture. This is how I remember the MVC framework. I have to think in terms of something practical because it seems like a jargon to me until I actually put it to work. Okay, so now let's look at this again. We have our model, view, and controller. So here is our client. Here's our guest into Safeway. He's coming in and says, "I'd like a sandwich." So he speaks to the controller. So controller, this was our lady Claudia. She receives the request. Okay, and Claudia here, she's happy to receive it, but she needs something from the back, and so she speaks to our model. All right, and our model we said was Joe. Joe is our happy guy, hard worker, and he writes to the database. Joe then, when he presents all the stuff from the database that Claudia needed, the controller, she says, "Okay, I'm done with this, my part in making the sandwich. Let me hand it over to the view." The view presents it and gives it back to the client. All right, we're going to do this over and over. Hopefully you can make an analogy for yourself that sticks if mine doesn't. But you have to find a way to make this make sense for yourself. Otherwise, it's just going to be something you repeat without understanding. Okay, so think of how you can make this stick for yourself. Find an analogy that works for you if mine doesn't. But what we need to know is how these work: the controller, the view, and the model. Okay, now that being said, we're going to build our app. We're going to build a full stack CRUD app from scratch now. And as I follow the instructions I see here on the code, I'm going to explain what the code does and bring it back to our analogy over and over again. Okay. If this lecture goes on more than an hour and a half, then I will break down our lecture and then we'll continue this this afternoon. Okay, so now let's go ahead and get started. Let's see what our goal is for creating our app. Okay, so yesterday when we built our CRUD app, it was very minimal, right? It was this one here. And what we did was build a server.py file. We had our MySQL connection file, and then we had this burger.py file. This was our, this held our class model, remember? And so we had the routes to where we wanted things to go in our server.py. And so these communicated with each other, which communicated with this MySQL, and that's what was able to render to the front. Now that works, but it's very minimal, and it's not in the MVC framework. This is just one cook in the kitchen here, or two in this sense, but we can do better than this. We can do better than this, and we're going to go with a MVC modularized version, this one here. So what this means is that the important files are going to go into their own folders. Here, this MySQL connection.py file is going to go into this config folder. As you see here, this one goes here. The burgers.py file, it's actually, well, it's different than our burger.py file. So this is new. All right. I'll go over what this is in a second, but here, this file, burger.py, it's actually this one here, burger.py, and it's our model. And according to our analogy, what does our model do? Our model is the person that goes into the refrigerator, works in the back, talks to the backend, talks to the database. Okay, so this person's talking to the database. Now we have our new player here. Remember, this is our controller. This is the person receiving the request. I want this sandwich. So this person receives the request, and this is a different file. Do you see how it's burgers.py? It's different than this burger.py. Now there's going to be a little bit confusion there if we don't remember our spelling of our files. But here is our controller. Now our controller's logic was previously in our server.py. So this is where it was previously. And so this is what we're pushing in here. Now our server.py is still here, but now it's going to have minimal code. It's going to have minimal logic. It's going to be used for starting up our app. All right, now there's a couple more differences as well, as you guys may already notice. Let me point them out. All of these files are in something called a Flask app. This thing is a folder that holds all the other folders, the config, the controllers, and the models folder. And it also holds the templates as well. So this Flask app holds all this stuff here. And that's different, right? Because look, the way we had it before, it was just, okay, we just had our static folders, our templates, and then everything else. But now we're creating a whole new folder. We're putting these other folders inside this folder. And then what's this? This is another new file. This is called a dunderinit.py file, and we're going to learn what it does as well. But to give the short answer, what this does is it makes this folder, this flask.app, it makes it a package that's available to the server.py. So this communicates with this one here. And what this dunder.py does is it makes this whole thing accessible to the server. I know there's a lot of moving pieces and we have a lot to memorize and digest, but we're going to get through it, and this is what it does, okay? So let's build it step by step with the process of things that we already know, and then we're going to make sense of it, okay? So let's go ahead and build this out. Now we can start with what we already know, which is the basic steps. I have some steps I want us to follow now. Okay, so I have a checklist. I'm going to try to follow this checklist as close as possible. Sometimes you skip a step, sometimes you accidentally forget a step, but we're going to try and do our best. So I have a checklist here, and I'm going to follow it as close as possible so that I can get my full stack CRUD app up and working. And then after that, today will be full stack CRUD developers working with an MVC app. So let's get started. Step 1, we need to create a new folder and go into that folder. Okay, so I have my new folder here. It's in my Python 2 folder. So I've created a folder called Full Stack CRUD app, or Full Stack CRUD, this one here. So I've already done step 1. I've created a new folder already. Here it is. So step 1 complete. Now I need to go into that folder. Okay, so I'm going to go into that folder. Let's go in. I'm going to say cd full stack CRUD. Now I'm here, and I want to clear my terminal so I have a better view. I'm inside now my created folder, and I'm already in terminal, so I don't need to open up terminal in this location. So first 3 here, check, check, check. We're done. So now that we're here in my folder, in my terminal, I need to start building my environment. So as what the instructions here say, pip env install Flask. Okay, so now that I'm here, I want to see my files created in real time. So this checklist that I have is actually already in here. So if I need to see here, it's just going to be built right around my checklist. So my checklist is sitting in the middle of everything. All right, so let's go ahead and continue. We said we need to build a, say, pip env install Flask. Pip env install Flask. All right. And so that I know that you guys are remembering everything as I do it, what does this do? What does this do? Well, this builds our environment, right? This builds our environment. Okay, I'm looking at the chat as well. Here's one thing that I do want to include in my process. Since yesterday, we have had to have a installation for connecting Flask to our database. So I'm actually going to say pip env and install one more here, PyMySQL. Okay, and so far so good. Now I'm looking at the chat, so in case I do forget anything, you guys are there to help pick me up. So I appreciate you guys being attentive. So now let's continue. I have edited my list here. Don't forget to add this line. So easy to forget. I missed it yesterday at a critical moment, but we found it, right? So here we are, and it's staring us again in the face. Always want to include this step now that we are including our file here, our MySQL connection.py file. Okay, so now let's continue. We have our pip file and our pip.lock. Looking good so far. And so let's test to see that our environment is up and running. So I want it is able to go up and running. So I'm going to say pip env shell. And when I do this, I know that I can get my environment up and running because it says the name of my app there, full stack CRUD in parentheses. So this is telling me the environment is up, and if you had a server, you could start the server from here. So all the dependencies are localized to this here, and I'm going to exit for a minute because I don't need to have my environment up yet. So exit, and there we're good. Okay, now we have a bit of difference in our steps because we have other files and folders to create. So we're going to create the config folder for the MySQL connection.py. We are also going to build the controllers for our burgers.py, and this is going to be our controller. We're going to build a folder for our model, our burger, and we're going to call it burger.py as well. Then we're going to also build our static folder, which holds our CSS, JS, images. And then we have our important templates folder, which holds our HTML. And then we have the super important file as well that we're going to explain still. So let's stick with us here, and I'm going to go ahead and create a couple more key folders. Now, this is a new folder. We have not yet created a config folder, and all it does is it holds our MySQL connection.py. So it's not just living out there in outer space. It has its own home. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to say mkdir, make a directory. Oh, and I forgot to explain one other thing here. Before I create any of these folders, before I create this folder, before I create this folder, before I create this, and this, and this, and this, before I go through all that, do we see the parent folder that they all live in? Which one do they live in? They all live in this guy here. This is our Flask app folder. So this one is going to be a container for all of our important organs here. So let's go ahead and create that Flask app. And so let's go ahead and say make dir Flask app. Okay. Now I'm going to cd into my Flask app. Let's go inside. And here I am. If I open it, there's nothing to open because there's nothing inside. So it's created. And I'm going to say mkdir config. All right. Let's see that it's there. And I'm going to go into it now, config. And now I'm going to create my MySQL connection.py file. Here's where I am, this step here. Okay. So I'm going to create my MySQL connection.py file. So let's go ahead and put it in. Touch MySQL connection.py. Okay. Let's see that it's there. There it is. One folder, and here's that one file in that one folder. Okay. We'll fill it with content in just a second. Let's create this structure and then give it some life after. All right. So then we're going to say get out of here, cd.ls, and I have my one config folder inside my Flask app. That's where I currently am. So now that I created my MySQL connection.py file, this is checked off the list. Now we move on to this one here, controllers. So here's our controller, and today this is the new person in our kitchen, and we said that she was the one that receives the order. So let's go ahead and create this controller. So we're gonna say Flask app, and let's say mkdir, and I'm gonna create the controllers. So controllers. Let me just double check that that's the correct way. Yes, with the plural, with the S. So let's go ahead and say make dir controllers. And what's our app going to be about? Well, I do want to stick with the food analogy, so I am going to go with what I'm seeing here, burgers. Okay, I know it says here to make like an animal model, but I like food right now, and we're going to go with the burgers. Okay, I would do sandwich because sandwich is what we would normally make in a deli, but I wish we did make burgers there. So let's go ahead and say Flask app ls. We have our controllers. So let's go into our controllers folder, cd controllers ls. And our app is about burgers. So I'm going to create this file here called burgers.py. Now we're going to look at what we can do to make this more understandable and better, but let's just follow this model for now. So I'm going to say touch burgers.py. Okay, let's see it. Here's my burgers.py file. Now I have a controller. I have someone that's able to receive requests and route them to the correct place. All right. Now we have our second person in our analogy, our hardworking Joe. We need our model. This is the person that builds the database tables, handles logic on the data, and interfaces with the database. So let's go ahead and build our model. This is the person working in the back, remember, talking with our fridge, getting the ingredients in case the controller needs it. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to pull it to the left so I can see. All right, so I'll say in my controllers folder, ls. I'm still in here, so I'm going to get out. And I'm in my Flask app. And I have a controllers, a config, so I need to make a models folder, mkdir models, ls, and then I'm going to cd into my models folder, and I'm going to build that file for the burger in my models. Now we're going to go over what the code looks like exactly and how it functions. I'm just telling you how it functions and asking you to believe me, but we're going to go into how the code works, but I'm still just giving you broad definitions. All right. So models, I'm going to say touch burger.py. And there it is. Here's my burger.py in my models folder. And let's go ahead and get out of here. Let's look at our checklist. All right, so I've built my models folder and I've built my models file. So we can check these off the list. And now I have a couple more folders to build, the static and templates. And what is this regards to? In my MVC framework, what letter are the static and templates? Starts with the V. The view. Yes. Excellent. So the view is just the presentation, right? It's the final product. It's a wrapped up sandwich or burger that we present to the client. So let's go ahead and make those. I'm going to say ls, and I'm going to create a static folder here, mkdir static, cd into my static folder. I don't want to see it built as I work it. So here it is. Here's my static folder. And I'm going to say in my static folder, I'm going to say make a directory for the CSS files and go in there for a second. And then make also a style.css file. Okay, so there it is, style.css. And let's get out of here. And also a JavaScript folder. We'll go there and make a JavaScript file. So touch script.js. Let's get out of here. We're back in our static. And there's probably one other one here we want. So touch images folder. Let's take a look at it as it's built. Here's my images. Did that not go right? Oh, yes, because I just said touch images. That's not creating a folder, so let's delete that. So I had to say make dir images, make a directory, not a folder. So there it is. So in case I need images in my app, I'll pull them in there and I'll get them from there. Okay, so now that we have our static done, we have one more folder to create. We have our templates folder. Okay, and our templates folder holds our HTML files. So let's get out of here. ls mkdir templates. Let's go in there and let's create the files we need. Now, in this here, we have more than one index.html. And we're going to see why they have more than one, because we're going to need more than one page to put all of our information in. What if we want a page just to show something for edit, something for show all, show one? Let me show you what I mean. Let's look at the assignment from yesterday. This here is one HTML page that looks different from the one that we're about to see this user enter. So after they enter the email, now this is a new HTML page, and this is a new one as well. So there's so far 3 HTML pages that we can notice in this app. The first one that here has a form, the second one that has a table, and the show has basically just information in not a table, but just like a text form. Okay, so the first view, all right, this route takes us to this HTML page. This user's route takes us to this one, and then it's moving fast, but you can see here what's going on, right? So that's why we have more than one HTML page here, is because we're going to access multiple different views. One maybe for logging in and creating a user, maybe another one for showing all the users that are in our app, one for maybe editing that specific user, and then something else. Okay, so we'll specify and show the need for each different HTML file. But for now, I'm just going to put in index.html because that's all that I know that I need. Okay, I'm not going to go crazy making a bunch of different HTML files. I'm just going to put a basic index.html, put hello world in there. Okay, so let's do that. Here I am in my templates folder, right? So let's close my static because it's a little confusing. All right, so I'm in my templates folder, and I'm going to say touch index.html. All right, so now I have my index.html file here. It's nice and cozy in there all by itself. Let's give it some code just because it's so easy. Now, I'll do hello world as well. So when we see this hello world on our browser, then we know we've reached a new step in creating our app. We've created this at least somewhat successfully so that our server can render our HTML page. Okay, and now we're missing a couple more key files in order to make this work properly. Well, for one, we missed this critical piece. Let's go ahead and fill in our MySQL connection.py. No, I don't want to do that. Let's look at my checklist. I get a little ahead of myself. Let's look at my checklist. All right, here's my checklist. And what does it say that I should create at this point? I've created my pip.lock file. I've created my templates. What I want to do now is create the last 2 files on my list here. My dunderinit.py file, which I'll explain what it does in a second. This here. And we have our server.py file. So we have 2 more steps. We need to create these 2 files. And then once we create these 2 files and put the proper contents inside, we're going to test to see that our server is working. So we want to see that our server is working nicely. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to create my 2 files. And the first one I'm going to create is the one that we're most familiar with first. So ls, and I'm going to cd out of here, and also outside of my Flask app. Because as you can tell, our server.py is outside of this guy. He doesn't live in it. He's not a child of it. So all of these are outside here. Everything else is inside this Flask app. So let's create the one we're most familiar with and then explain what this guy does. Okay, so let's go ahead and do it. Flask app, I need to get out of here. I'm back to my main folder. I'm going to say touch server.py. And is it there? Yes, it is. There it is, server.py. So I only have one more file left to make this folder structure complete. And it's to go inside my Flask app and create this dunder init.py. So dunder is the name of something when you see the double underscore init. So this is a file, as you can already tell, looks a lot like what? If you can remember. I'll let that question hang as I build it. ls cd, I'm going to go into my Flask app. It looks like a class when we say initialize an instance of this class, right? So I'll explain that in a second. Let's go ahead and go in here and say touch underscore init underscore dot py. So we should now have a complete list of things here. So let's compare it to our view here. Do we have the same thing? We have a Flask app that when we open, it has the config, the controllers, the models, static, templates. It has the dunder init.py inside the Flask app. It's not inside any of the other folders here. And then outside of my Flask app, I have my pip.lock file and my server.py file. So it looks so far so good. Okay, before I get this running now, I want to make sure that we understand how I was able to follow along my steps and create all those folders and files before testing any code. Okay, did we all follow along of what I just did there, how I built these folders and files? We didn't explain so much, what their purpose is, but that we can build them this way, and we're going to explain how they work in just a minute. Okay, so far looking good. All right, so now let's talk about how to connect our files. Okay, let's put some code in here so that we can better understand. So this folder, the Flask app folder, we're told to create this file, which we did. And we're also told that we need to insert this code here. And so I did. Do you guys remember what this code was before and where we had previously used it? Any idea?
Start.py. Start.py.
Yes, it used to be on the server.py file. And what was its purpose? What was this bit of code's purpose when it was there?
Was that for session?
Yes, exactly. So now we're putting our session code in our dunder init.py. So what this file does is it's a connector file for our server.py. So our server.py is no longer going to handle that functionality, as you can tell. It's now in this dunder init.py. And what this dunder init.py does is it makes everything in the Flask app available to the server.py. So it's a connector. It's going to be it allows this Flask app to be treated as one giant folder that we can access the controllers, the models, the static, and config. And that way we can do modularization, so distribute the work to different files. If we didn't have this dunder init.py, we couldn't have all these other folders in this Flask app available to our server.py. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue to build our server.py then. So what do we need in here? We need something that imports from our Flask app our app. So this here now connects our folder Flask app and it imports app. And what is app? In dunder-init.py, this is the name of the application. Okay, so this is what we are importing. We're importing this dunder-init.py's functionality, which used to be in our server.py, but now we're giving it to our dunder-init.py. And so we're saying through this file, we can access everything in the Flask app because we have imported it here. From Flask app, from this folder, import app. And so it knows what app is because app inside this Flask app has something. It has a value, the name of the app itself. Okay, now there's a couple more key components that we need in our server.py. Who can tell me what they are? Still need something here to make this work. I'll give you guys 5 seconds to post it in the chat before I paste it in.
The debugging, the if, not sure.
This thing here. This thing here tells me the port that I'm going to run my app on, port 8000. Okay, so let's go ahead and see if our app is up and running now, but we do need something in order to connect our server. Well, even though it's connected, what is it going to render, right? We need something to render, which is that HTML file. So let's go into our folder structure here and take a look at what these controllers and models do for us. Okay, because they have a purpose, and no longer is server.py going to be the one controlling routes. So what does who is the one that controls the routes? Well, it's our controller, right? So our controller is the one that's going to app.route us to our index.html. Okay, so let's go ahead and work in our controller for now. So let's go there. We're in our burgers.py file. So let's go ahead and say I want to import something. I want to say from Flask import render template, right? Because we need this controller to give a route so that we can render a template. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll say app.route users. And I'm going to say, no, not users, burgers. Sorry, I'm thinking about users. Okay, so I want this to be just our basic home page. Okay, I don't need this to go anywhere but to the index.html. And so this here is going to go to index.html. And so what I need is a return render template. So let's say def home page. And then I'll say return render template. And I'll say the name of the file, index.html. And then I think that's good enough. Now I'm going to look here, double check to see if I miss anything in my imports. Do I need to import app? I don't think so. I think we're good here. So this here should then take me to my templates folder, which will render that index.html. I don't think I'm missing any import lines here, but if I am, I know which one I'm missing. So let me go ahead and test my app at this point. So what I need to do is get my environment up and running, right? So we have the boilerplate code. We're at this step. We need to test to make sure the server is working and that it will direct us to the proper place. Okay, so let's go ahead and see that. I'm going to say pip env shell. Am I in the right folder? Let me check here before I start. I'm in the wrong folder. So here's something you always want to be aware of. When you start your pip env shell, you're going to need to know where you are in order to get that properly running. So let me see here. ls, I'm going to get out of here because I want to be here. This is where I have my pip.lock and pip file. So this is where I want to do pip env shell. So let's see that running. Okay. And now it's telling me we're good to go. So I can start my server, Python 3 server.py. Okay, so we have something running now. Let's check to see if our hello world is showing. Okay, we have our first error, but we're getting somewhere now. Okay. I think I'm missing that import that I said that I needed. Okay, so let's read what we have here, running on localhost 8000. And it says here, not found. The requested URL was not found in the server. So let's see where we're being taken in our app. Here's where we want to test to make sure everything is nice and clean. So I have here my Flask, my server.py. It connects my dunder init.py here. And I also have something on my checklist I want to double check that I'm going to use to make sure that I'm doing this right. So I'm going to pull it to the side and pull up my checklist right here. It's next to it. All right, so now in my dunder init.py, there's something here. So I have from Flask, import Flask. This we don't need yet. This we have, and this we have as well.
Josh, did you import your controller in server.py?
No, I didn't. Thank you, sir. So, all right, fantastic. Awesome. So let's go ahead and pull in our controller. So what we're missing now is a connection from here to our controller, which renders here. Okay, so let's go ahead and add that in. So in my server.py, I'm going to say from Flask app dot controllers import burgers. Okay. I think that should do it. And I also want to make a connection to models here as well, just because I know I'm going to need it later. So I'm going to connect to models as well. So say from Flask app dot models dot burger. I want to import a burger. Okay, now let's test this now. Oop, I missed a route here. So app.route. So now it's connected. And now that it's connected, it's telling me I have an error in my code here on line 6. So let's go ahead and look at line 6 in our burgers.py, burgers.py, line 6, app.route. What could I be missing there? Let me take a look. So I have here my app.route, and then my route, and then I say def homepage. I have my return render template index.html. Let's look at the code one more time. Says app is not defined. Okay, so what I need here is to import my app. Okay, so in my burgers.py where I have my controllers, let's take in our app. So I'm going to say here from Flask app, import app. So it is taking in this entire folder and importing app from dunder.py. I think that's the last piece of the puzzle. Let's confirm it. Okay. Now it's telling me from the models that this doesn't exist in my what file here? Let's see, where am I? Cannot import burger from Flask models burger in my what file? Burger.py. But where are you trying to import it? It doesn't work. Server.py. Ah, I get why. Because in my server.py, it's looking for something that doesn't yet exist. Let's see if we can just comment this out for now and make it work. There we are. Okay. So now it's running, and now we have a hello world. All right. We've gotten to this step. We've cleared this threshold. We've got our server up and running with our files and folders modularized. All we need to do now is start putting in code so that we can start seeing our different renders of different pages with our CRUD functionality. Okay, so let's take a look at our checklist and see where we need to go from here. Okay, so we have our server.py connected to our dunder.py, and from our dunder.py, we grab everything. So this is our main connecting file that allows us to say, for example, in this burgers.py, I said, from the Flask app, import app. So give me this whole entire Flask app and everything that's available to it, so that when I say render template index.html, it means something. It doesn't mean if I didn't have this line, it wouldn't know that there is a index.html in my templates folder. Okay, so we've done a lot of work at this point. We've built a lot of folders. We've built a lot of files. We've learned what these files and folders do in relation to each other, but we still haven't filled them in yet. Let's look at our checklist and see where we have to go. So we have our server.py. We had that already up and running. Now we need to fix our MySQL connection. And I know it's getting late in the hour here, so we won't push this too long because I know we've been talking and working for a while already. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this information from our platform. So I'm going to say go to database, go to connecting to a database, give me that code. I'm going to copy it from here and paste it into my config, MySQL connection. And since I'm on a Mac, I need to change that password there. And now I have this folder set up. Now I'm ready to, through this file, access the database. And what file did we say interacts with the database? Not this one here. This is just ORM. This is something that helps us. Which is the file here that is our file that talks to our database once we receive the route from the controller? Is our model. Our model. Yes. Yes. So there's a lot that needs to be done in our now controllers and models modules or files. We are going to be working on this as the focus of this afternoon's lecture. Okay, I don't want to overwhelm us with too much information. At this point, I want us to be satisfied with building this folder file structure and making this connection between all these files to render a hello world. Okay, this is going to be our starting point for building the full stack CRUD app this afternoon. Okay, someone had their hand raised. I clicked it before I could see. Brooks?
Yeah, I had a quick question. I was wondering, so in the, let me lower my hand. In the the init file, the init.py file,
Yes, the
where
Dunder.
yeah. So we're importing from Flask, import Flask. And then in our controllers file, we did the import render template. Is there a way that we could import like render template, session, redirect, all that stuff in the Dunder one and then not have to do that again in the
Yes.
controllers file?
Yes.
Is that possible? Okay.
Yes.
I was
And
just
there
curious.
is a way to make that convenient. I just haven't done that yet. So before I show like the shortcut way of doing everything, I have to kind of show the hard way, and then we'll
Yes, totally.
appreciate what this file does. But if I just start putting a whole bunch of code in here, I don't want the main purpose of this to be lost so far. So
Okay,
what this
thank you.
here is holds the app name so that we can access this whole entire Flask app here. No, excellent question. And I was thinking about doing that actually, but before I throw too many things at us at once, I want us to just have something digestible here that we can understand. How we got to this hello world from this giant folder file structure. So now we have a server.py. It doesn't have any routes in here. All the routes are now going to be handled by our file here in our controllers. This is for our controller. So this is going to be the traffic director. Receives the request and says, oh, models, I need this from you. Or, oh, here, I'll just direct this to the view, the templates. Okay, so this is now our receiver. And so we're going to have a lot of communication between our controllers and our models. And then once we have that information, then our models and our view. All right, so let's take a look at where we have to go this afternoon and then build a plan of attack on how we can get there. So we still have a lot to do, which is to create a CRUD app, right? We have to create, read, update, and delete. So far, all we have is rendering a template. Now, once we have all the the CRUD features, create, read, update, and delete, it's already written for us. We can take that code that's already done, that CRUD functionality, and we can build many similar apps to it. So once we have it the first time done, we can see how easy it is just copy and paste into another project, another folder. And many projects are going to be very similar to your baseline CRUD app. I mean, of course, there's going to be variations and different specifications according to what you need. But once we build it, you'll see how similar apps are to each other in how they access the database, how they read, create, update, and delete. Okay, so I'm going to focus on that this afternoon, finishing out our CRUD app, making it create, read, update, and delete. As you can see here, we already have our methods that we're going to get into. We're going to create our own unique class here, not based on what we see here, but we're using this as a checklist to follow. Continue the part now. If they're all okay, we can work on our homeworks later. I mean, other parts. Okay. Manjira, you want to continue? I just if I drag this on another to finish the lesson, it'll be like maybe another hour. And then I think at that point we'll be fully exhausted. So I think it's good for us to take a break. I think it is good for us to take a break. So we will break off at this point. I know we set up just our template here to get working, but now that everything is up and going, our keys in the ignition, we're ready to start building, and we will start building. Okay, so this afternoon, we're going to use this model here to start making our CRUD app come to life. Because this here is going to take up the majority of our focus, and we've been talking now here for an hour and a half. So let's break off now and say meet at this afternoon. We'll have another super important lecture. We'll finish up our CRUD app, and this will leave us for the weekend a CRUD app in our hands that we can play with, digest, and it'll be super fun once we have it up and working. Okay, so we'll get this done at 2. And so please don't miss this lecture because it's going to be super important. You're going to really want to be here to ask questions, to debug in case you see some of the bugs I run into, so on and so forth. Okay? Alrighty, everyone. So let's take one more poll. Do we understand how I build this folder structure, what the dunderInit.py file does, how it connects the controller's file to our server, that we can render our hello world? Alrighty, fantastic. So let's go ahead and end this recording session and pick it up in a few hours. Let me share my screen and let's go over the calendar one last time so that we are all square. All right, so again, we just finished this morning introduction to the MVC framework. This afternoon, we are going to finish building our CRUD app. And that will be how we end the day. Okay, anyone, do we have any questions, comments, concerns? Okay, fantastic. All right, let's get working then. The end of the day project, end of the day goal here is to be able to build this app here, Dojos and Ninjas. It's going to have this sort of database, and it should have this functionality here where you enter in a dojo, you can add a ninja, view a ninja to a dojo, and pull up their information. Okay, so this should be our goal for this afternoon. I'm going to build this, something very similar this afternoon. And so you can use this as a base to do your end of day assignment as well. Okay, try to work to get to this point before this afternoon so that when you run into any snags, you have a question ready for me. Okay, so let's go ahead and break off into groups. Okay, Vincent, would you open them for me now?
Oh,